Hello, learner. Welcome to Mr. Quickest Teaches. In this lesson, I'll be providing the character profile and traits for Chief EUGENE Achike, otherwise known as Papa in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's novel Purple Hibiscus. My analysis will be especially helpful for those writing the GCSE or IGCSE because this is one of the required texts in your prose component of the exams. But then it's also going to be useful for people who are maybe reading the book and want to know more about the character of Chief EUGENE or any other exam for that matter where you may be asked to write on him or give a report on him. Let's dive in. Now, Chief EUGENE Achike, otherwise known as Papa, is the antagonist of the novel Purple Hibiscus. He's the patriarch of the Achike house and a terror to his wife. So he's like a terror to his wife, Mrs. Beatrice Achike. She's also known as Mama as well in the novel. And his children, Kambili, the narrator, and Jaja, who's the son. Now, whose lives he domineers with an iron hand and very brutal brand of spousal and child abuse. Now, he has a public persona and a private persona. That's something that is very important that you note. So in public, however, he determinedly fights for the restoration of democracy and the freedom of his fellow Nigerians with his enormous wealth, which he made as an industrialist with his newspaper, The Standard. That's what we see. So in public, he fights determinedly. He fights with all his might. Because the rich industrialist, he has factories that make products and all of that. Now, the polar opposite nature of his private and public persona makes him a duplicitous or two-faced character. So one of the key things you should note about him is that he's a two-faced character or duplicitous character. So somebody who has, a very affable, likable, public persona when he's dealing with his church, when he's dealing with the people in his village. But then when he's dealing with his family, is a different thing. Maybe the only public show of his irritation is his father. But for the most part, when people see him behaving in public, because of his generosity, because of his modesty, they see him as a man that is, a very good man. Chief EUGENE has a very conservative persona. So in terms of the religion that he practices, he's very conservative and practices a very fanatical brand of Catholicism. So he's very conservative and fanatical. And if you compare him, for example, with his sister Auntie Ifeoma, you see the clear difference. Auntie Ifeoma is a bit more liberal, allows the children to express themselves. Kambili tells us, for example, that it's her father, that's Chief EUGENE Papa, that chose her name when she was being confirmed during her confirmation, right? But then Amaka decided that she was going to use her name, and then because of that, she did not join the confirmation. So we see that kind of difference between them. And the whole issue that makes everything, according to Kambili, fall apart is because her brother Jaja refused to partake in communion. So we see that Chief EUGENE is very fanatical. So Chief EUGENE is revered in all sectors of the society for his generosity, philanthropy, and modesty. So he's very generous to beggars, people you see on the street, philanthropy towards his church, and then modesty. He's not someone who wants people to praise him. His local priest, Father Benedict, holds him as a paragon of virtue. His fellow parishioners defer to him. His clansmen in Aba conferred on him the title Omelora. So the one who does for his community. That's the title that the people of his clan give to him. And in wider Nigerian society, he is given awards for his dedicated advocacy for good governance and democratic rule in Nigeria. So he's someone that is respected everywhere he goes. At church, in his clan, in greater Nigeria. In fact, we are told that Amnesty World gave him an award. Chief EUGENE, however, began life as a houseboy and a gardener for a parish priest. He also claims that he had to walk 8 miles to school when he was in an elementary school. So that's like the character that we see. This is like an introduction of him. Now, in terms of his physical description, this is how Kambili describes her father. So She describes him as a very large man. And these are quotes that support this fact. She says his buttocks quivered and shook like a camel, probably made a camel jelly-like. And then she also says later on that when he sat on a mattress, says my mattress sank when he sat. And then she also tells us that, which is so narrow. Here she's describing Papa Nuku's house in Aba. And she says, which is so narrow that Papa might have to enter sideways if he ever were to visit. So all of these points presents him as a quite large man. So imagine a man with such enormous wealth and presence, the respect or the regard with which people would treat him. Now let's look at other descriptions of him. His daughter Kambili, the narrator, and her brother Jaja both revere and fear him. So they revere their father. Especially, the novel begins in the middle and then before we are taken back to the beginning of sorts. But when we see the family at first, they both revere and fear their father. His wife is not only afraid of him, but she sees him as God sent. So that's how his family sees him. Initially. His sister Auntie Ifeoma described him as a, quote, colonial product. And that I think is because of his fact that he detested his family speaking the local language Igbo in public. So he has the white man's language as English in high regards and disdains the public speaking of the Igbo language. Another man, Ani Kweninwa, we are told in the novel, a man the same age as his father, Papa Nuku, described him as Ifukwagi, which means a fly that flies blindly and follows a corpse into the grave. And I think in certain regards, that essentially becomes the end of him. That brutality with which he dealt with his family to the extent that his wife turned around and said, no, I'm going to murder this gentleman. I'm going to murder my husband. Now this is how Chief Eugene remembers his younger years. So he tells the readers about his younger years. He imagines that without the Catholic Church, he would have not amounted to much. So he has a very high regard for the Catholic Church. And that we see when he speaks here in the quote. I didn't have a father who sent me to the best schools. Here he's speaking to Kambili when she came second in class. My father spent his time worshiping gods of wood and stone. I would be nothing today but for the priests and sisters at the mission. I was a houseboy for the parish priest for 2 years. Yes, a houseboy. Nobody dropped me off at school. I walked 8 miles to Nemo until I finished elementary school. I was a gardener for the priest while I attended St. Gregory Secondary School. And Kamili says, I had heard this all before, how hard he had worked. So we see here that he had a hard life when he was growing up. Extremely hard life. He had to work as a houseboy, work as a gardener, had to walk great distances to school. In many regards, you would describe him as a self-made man. Now, in terms of his traits, Chief Eugene, one of the key traits we see about him is his violence. So he is violent and physically abusive to his family. So a question can be thrown to you, for example, how does Adichie strikingly present Papa or Kambili's father or Chief Eugene Achike in the novel Purple Hibiscus? One of the key things that we see is that he's very violent. And if you're writing a paragraph on this, you ought to be able to talk about his violence towards his wife, his son Jaja, and then his daughter Kambili. Now, Chief Eugene was physically abusive to all the members of his family. That's his nuclear family. His wife, his son Jaja, and his daughter Kambili. Violence on his wife. Chief Eugene's beatings caused his wife to suffer multiple miscarriages. So Mrs. Achike suffered multiple miscarriages. And the first evidence we see of this is the quote. Kambili is the one recounting here. She says, I was in my room after lunch when I heard the sounds, swift, heavy thoughts on my parents' hand-carved bedroom door. I imagined the door had gotten stuck and Papa was trying to open it. If I imagined it hard enough, then it would be true. So here, Kambili tells what happens in the immediate aftermath of them returning from church. When their father, according to Kambili, they had to say hello to Father Benedict after church, after mass every Sunday. But in this instance, Mrs. Achike said she was feeling really sick. She was about to throw up, and so she couldn't go with the family. Immediately, Chief Eugene said, are you sure you want to be? And then she went, and then after this, he went home, and then he attacked her this way. And if you listen to my analysis on Father Benedict, I talk about how he's an enabler of Chief Eugene's excesses. But we see here that This is like the first revelation that Kambili exposes that her father domestically abuses her mother. So he beats her. In fact, after this, her mother lost the baby. Now, evidence one, Mrs. Achike suffered miscarriage because of his beatings. In the quote below, Mrs. Beatrice Achike informs Kambili about her miscarriage, and we see that in the quote. When here, Mrs. Achike is the one speaking. She tells Kambili there was an accident, the baby is gone. Now, observe the use of euphemism, right? And then he also comes across as a metaphor as well. So Mrs. Achike actually reports her miscarriage here to Kambili, says it was an accident, the baby is gone. It's almost like the baby is going to come back again. That she euphemizes the loss of the baby. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Chief Eugene's abuse caused his wife to suffer multiple miscarriages. The second evidence is that Mrs. Achike revealed details of another domestic abuse that led to another miscarriage to Kambili. And we see that in the quote where Mrs. Achike is the one speaking here. She says, you know that small table where we keep the family Bible? Here she's speaking directly to Kambili. Your father broke it on my belly. And then Kambili says, she sounded as if she were talking about someone else. As if the table were not made of steady wood. So here, in this instance, Mrs. Achike was struck on the stomach with a huge steady wood. Like it's hard. And she was taken to the hospital. Around this point, Kambili and Jaja were actually in Nsukka. She ran and joined them in Nsukka. So again, we see that domestic violence. So not only when Kambili and Jaja are at home, but when they are away as well, their father beats their mother, again causing them miscarriages. In fact, in the novel, we are told that I think Mrs. Achike suffered at least 6 miscarriages because of her husband's beatings. Hello, learners. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson so far. This is a sample analysis of the novel Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. The complete course contains video analysis of the characters, settings, themes, conflicts, etc. To access the full analysis, purchase the entire course at mrquakersteaches.com. Find the purchase links in the description below. See you in class.